Let us go on to a very special topic and one of my favorite. So the test-driven development approach. This one is quite different to a normal development approach. In general, by test-driven development, we try to first focus on the tests and afterwards writing the code for it. What is really important about this approach is this cycle of life in test-driven development. So we first start at this point and rewrite our first test. Because we haven't write any code of it yet, we know that these tests will fail, and this means that we have a failed test. What we try to achieve now is that the test passes. To achieve that, of course, we need to write the code that the code is behaving like the expected result. First off, we write the test. Afterwards, we write the code to pass the test. It's also quite important to watch out for the colors here. So before we start with the development, we want to make sure that our test failed, and this is marked with the red color. And afterwards, we just write one test at a time, and afterwards we just try to get this test working. We go on and write our code as best as possible to make the test passing, and afterwards we are on a green stage, it's called. So if we execute our GUT, we see that everything is passed and we are fine, and we are on the green OK stage. And afterwards we go in the last step, and this step is really important, and some people tend to skip this step, and this is a really bad mistake, because the refactoring step is one of the most important step in the cycle, and it also helps us to provide a very good code quality. And I think that's the part which makes test-driven development that unique and that fun at all, because after our test is passing, we are able to refactor all of our code we have written so far and make it as best looking, as best behaving as possible. And because we have the tests, we can always run the test and look if everything is still on the green stage. At this point, we have the possibility to improve our code a lot and also improve our test code. And with executing the test, we just can see if we have changed any behavior or everything is fine. And the tests are our backup to say that our code is still running fine. This is quite cool on test-driven development, I think, and this is where the fun lies in. Also, the approach is if you are normally just a normal programmer as I am, and then you go into and just think about how you could define your classes, how you could make objects, how could they all work together and interact. You always have a big picture in your mind, and then you start to programming and try to achieve what you think about it. And the test-driven development is really step by step, because you always focus on really simple steps, and you build up your code more and more to a stage where it becomes more complex. But because of the tests, it's always easy, because you always go one step at a time. So let us go on with a real world example. I hope the example for my game works out quite well to just show you the first steps of this approach and how to use it. So I have my Jira opened. Our task is to create the 900 AD mine. So in my game we have just my building, my island, and here is a hole where we can later on gather resources through a mine building. And what we now want to achieve is to have another building placed over there. And because of that, we of course need to make the code for it, and the buildings need to know that there is a building. Also, the building will bring up some more advantages later on. For example, you can defend with more people and stuff like that. Also, it can be destroyed, so we need to make sure this is working. What we try to achieve is we want to add another building. As you could see before, we have just our HQ, and this is what in my building script is already written down. So we have a small buildings GD script here. I already have an enum with our 4 types of different buildings. I have a constant with my max health. I have some models for the HQs, which are different epoch. We have our buildings state where just our buildings are saved, and we have the init buildings epoch where we just initialize at the beginning of the game our HQ building. How do we start now with test-driven development? we first go to our test folder on unit tests, and I just create a new GD script and I save it as test unit test buildings GD. As said before, it needs to extend from our test GD. So we just have a quick look in our cycle to make just one round that you know what we have to do. So first of all, we should make sure that our test fails. So what we first want to achieve is that our test fails. As you can see, for now everything is fine. So what we first do is we have our test, and my first test would be to test if we has in mind. What I try to achieve here is first I want to preload my buildings so that we have our buildings, and normally I just initialize the buildings script. Now we have our buildings, and now we want to have a function like something like buildings has mine. So, and we expect it to return some kind of Boolean value. So in our case, we know there isn't any mine yet because we haven't placed. So what I want to make sure is if I execute the function buildings on my building script I showed you before, this is this one, I just preloaded here, I initialized my object here, and now I try that my function has mine should return false. So what we now expecting, if we are run our GUT, it shouldn't work. And as you can see, it is broken because the function test has mine called to an unexistent function because we don't written the code at all. That means we have now one failing test. Of course, I could have tell you that before, that the function wasn't existing and that's the test's fault. But of course, for showcases, I just want to run the GUT command that you can see. We have actually now a failing test, and what we now need to make sure is that we get our passing tests. So what I do now is I go to my building script and I write a function with has mine, and I just return, for showcase I return null in this case. So we now have a has mine function which returns null. So we expect it false, so let us execute the test. And as you can see, the test is running through because now the function is existent, and we have 54 pass tests and one is failing because we expect false to have in test has mine, and we get null value, and this isn't matching. It is now a bit difficult in the test-driven approach because you may think, why should I write that? Because it's pretty simple, and every programmer knows that that's isn't working at that. So I try to focus on really little baby stats to just show you the approach, how is it working in general. Of course, if I would do it with my experience, I wouldn't test now that easy kind of stuff. I would making bigger steps, but you have to make sure that when you start first with test-driven development, you want to keep these steps short and don't do too big steps, because if you just skip all these tests for now and you would just write, okay, I don't have to test if I has my mine, I just know I will build it and I just want to know if it's actually mining something, then you are already skipping so much test, which can be quite handy in later on. So we want to make sure that the step we take or we go is not too big at all. So let us move on. In this case, we now know our test is failing. We can now jump back. We are here in this red stage because test fails. What we want to achieve is now that the test is green, that the test passes. So what we have to do for that, we could just do something like that. If we do something like that, our function is just returning false. And if we are now running this test, the tests again, we see that everything is fine and we are now on the test passes stage. But as you can see, I just faked now the function. So we write another test. we write the second test. Test has mined if there is one. So by that I mean that we are this time are just testing if there is a mine, and we expect that there is a mine. So if I now write asset equal true on buildings which has mine, then my fake I wrote before wouldn't work anymore, because on the first test is passed and on the second now we have true and it is false. This action is quite cool because now we have to think about it. In this case we expect false, in this case we expect true. Now we have to see what we have to do here. So in my cases I would just say something like buildings has mine. This is the code we would need to make it work, because we have our buildings object over here and we have the mine over here, and we know we want to set it like that. So but this is not enough yet, because it's not set at all. So if we run the test now, we would get the same problem. Yeah, we would run in the same problem, because now we just have true and this is to false because it isn't there. So to fix this, we are again, just to make sure, we are again on the red stage and we want to go to the green stage. So we need to fix it by now. And what we want to do is we have our buildings dot buildings, and we just want to add the mine, and in our case it's just an empty object. So what we do now is just we faking the buildings object and just set it to mine. So we have a mine here and this one should be true. And as you can see, our tests are passed and 0 are failed. So we are on the green stage now, and now we can go on with the refactor stage, because already in this situation where we only have 2 tests, we can already refactor something. Yeah, now we are in the refactoring stage. Unfortunately, we haven't that much code written before, but I have already seen that I have made sure that this one is working. And yeah, I have another function which is called hasHQ, and this one is just more complicated. So we verified with our test that this one is working, so we can refactor our code here and having just a simpler code like that. And now we can think about it and also see, these both functions are looking quite similar, so maybe we can also doing some refactoring there. Because I already know that later on we will also get a third building and a fourth building. So what I have in mind is something like function. We can do it like a private function and can do something like has building. We can give it a key, and what we do is return buildings key. Return building has key. So, and what we are doing here is return has building, and also here has building. So now we have just the what we have done now is just we have our logic in this function, and these both functions are just some decorator functions which are just easy to use for our HQ and mine, and just calling this function. So if there's anything wrong with this function, we just have one place where we can do it. And now, as I said before, the cool part about that is now we can just run our test, and we can now make sure that our refactoring was successful and everything is working as before. So we improved our code with just 2 tests, and these are very simple tests. This approach offers very different approach to programming and has definitely advantages, and it's quite cool. So let us do another one. What I want to do now is I want to create a function where we can actually set our mine with some parameters in the buildings. As you can see here, we have the HQ, and it has some kind of a model, it has a type, and it has a health. And now we need to set this as well for our mine. So what I want to make sure is that we have a test for setting mine. What we need for that is a new building script, and then we want something like buildings set mine, and afterwards we again want to make sure that our buildings has a mine. So in this case, of course, we already know that this function isn't there, so we have to write this function. We just call it setMine, and for now it should pass. So, and now if we run the test again, we should have a failed test again, because we have written the setMine, but it don't do anything for now, so it isn't true, and we are on the red stage for now. So what we have now to do is we have to somehow set the building. So the easiest way of that was something like we have done before. We have the buildings, we have the mine, so we can look at our initialization of our HQ. So that was written something like that. So we need the same for the mine here. What we do is we set the buildings object. Or better said, what we do in the set mine now is what we have done in our test script before. So this one we now extract to this one. So if everything is cool, it should now work and our test should work. As you can see, we have passed it, and now we can go on in refactoring. Since I haven't done that much for now, and I don't want to refactoring really anything because that will come with the later tests, we will go on with the next test. So what I want to make to ensure now is maybe one thing, I tend to use just one asset per test. This makes sure if one test is failing, I know which asset is failing. If you're using multiple assets in one test, you can do that, of course, but then it's always hard to identify which asset is failing, because GUT is just telling you the test function which is failing, and then you have to manually check which asset is the problem. So let us move on with the next step. So what I want now is we have setting the mine, and now I want to make sure that it's just not just an empty object. It should be an object with some health points. So we can also, of course, just copy that over, so I don't have to write it anymore. But this time we don't want to create that. We want to get the buildings mine and check our health point with 50. So what we're doing now is we set the mine, and afterwards we want to check if the buildings get buildings mine. So we want to get our building mine and want to check if the health points equals 50. So in this case, I already know that the test would fail because the health isn't set. So what I do now is just to have the health, and I just set it to 0. Now we run the test, and it is broken because the identifier mine is not found, of course, because it's buildings mine. And now we run the test, and it's still broken because did you mean git buildings? I just mistyping so much. I normally don't type so much on this. Sorry, it's of course it is a function. So now we have it. Now we are on the red stage because one test is failing, and we expect 50 health point and we have 0 health point. To fix that, it's quite simple. We just have to add 50 over there, and we know it is working. But now we are on the green stage, and now it's again time to refactor. And this time we actually have a lot to refactor, because we know we mess up the code here a bit, and yeah, there are two things actually I dislike. The first thing is we have the buildings with the health over here, and we have also the initial, which is doing quite the same stuff. So we can refactor that. And another thing is in our tests, we have here the get buildings function, and then I accessing through this key without making sure that this key is existing in general. So I just access a health key which can be null, and these are the two parts I want to refactor now. Because we are on the green stage, we know what we have, and now we can go over on. So let us first start with the building script. And what we do is we have something like, we want to write a private function, set building, we give it a key, we give it a health point, and we give it some kind of path. We start here because here we already have that. So we write a private function which is called set building. We give it the key, we give it the path, we give it the health point. Yeah, and here we already have. So then we can delete that one. We scroll down and write our set building. We have key, we have the model, and we have the health. So what we do now is we set buildings key, we set this one to model, this is our health, and this is also the key. That's also the same we are doing here. We don't have a model for now, so we can delete that one. We have set mine. Now we have two functions with just set building, and we give it that point. Okay, here is the wrong order. It should be this order. And now we have that, and just, you know, we can now check if everything is working as before. And it is. We are past, and we are still on the green stage. So we know we now wrote another function which combines two functions in one, and yeah, that's refactoring, and we and our tests back up that everything is working as before. So I normally tend to put in the private with an underscore and just put them on the lower end of this file, so everything is a bit more visible. So as I said before, now we have the test where I also want to make something different, because get buildings mine health isn't that convenient. So what I would like to have is something like buildings get health points, get building HP for health points, and then I just put in buildings mine. So this one is looking much better in my opinion, and we can make sure that everything is working. So we go into that one, we go over here, we have func get building, we have the key, and then we can do if building, we have a function for that, if has building key return buildings key health. Otherwise we would return false. Now we can check if this is working. So we test, and everything is working as before. I already now can see that this one is better than before, but I know that I would refactor this as well, because the health key isn't set there. So I would do something like a get building function by key, which is just ensuring that the key is over there. So we can just abstract that one Now for now it's okay. Now we have here 4 tests, and now we could go on. We could now test if the mine has a model set. We then can make sure that the right model is set. We can make sure that the mine is getting damaged, and afterwards we can check if it's damaged. So with all the tests in mind, we can write now more tests and think about what is the next step we want to make sure. So these were of course very small steps to show you the approach, but this is the way the programming is working, and you should definitely check it out in this approach, because it opens your mind for a complete different approach to program, and you can keep your mind clear of all that heavy class function stuff in your head. You just have to think about your test, and in this case you just have to think about the next step. So I would go with the next step and just test if I have a model available. Then I would set the model. Afterwards I would test if we can do damage, and if the damage is done right. I can imagine a test to test if we can check to get the mine even if the mine isn't there. There are hundreds of possibilities, and you always have to make sure which test is convenient for you and which test is bringing some functionality for you. It also, we haven't had a test in this case now, but we can also test some edge cases. So if there is some do damage function for especially if there's some damage function especially, we could check if there are some minus numbers ongoing, or if it's stopped by 0 health point and stuff like that. So you can just test whatever you want, and these tests will help you to extend your code to actually fit the behavior you expected from that. The video is much longer than I expected, and I would love to, I guess I will split it up into multiple parts and made out a tutorial series out of that. So we will see how much video material it is in the end. I hope I could show you the approaches and show you how the tests in GUT are working, and you could learn something, of course. Also, if there are some topics you want to know more about it, just comment below. Make sure you subscribe to the videos, because I always want to do more tutorials, and this is only possible if you support me, if you tell me what topics you want to see and what I should talk about. So that's it for today. I hope it helps you. Happy coding. Bye.